All right, so here's what I've got. I just finished milling the the three major parts and the 4 braces that we need for the stool. Now, as I've done this, I've left the top about 1/4 inch over wide. We'll talk about why that is here in just a minute. But I've cut the ends to exact size, except I've also left them just a smidge thick because we're going to fit those down into dados. So cut your parts to size. Next stop, over at the bench to do some router work. So the next operation now is to create the dados on the underside of the top. There are a number of different ways you can do this. If you're traditional and you want to do it all by hand, you're going to lay in your lines, saw cut to the lines, and then remove the material with a chisel or a router plane. Another option is to go to the table saw and set up a dado stack and make the cuts. Now, you think that's a lot quicker. However, when you take the time to set up a dado stack, to me, I think that's a pain, and you have to get it exactly set right and things like that. So for me, I turn more to a router with a pattern bit, and that's the method we're going to use. So let's walk through the layout process, and then I'll explain the router setup to you and a straight edge that I'm going to use to do the work. All right, as we begin, the first thing I want to do is lay in from the ends 4 1/4 inches. And this is just to give us some overhang on the back side or on the outside of our support system down below the top. Next, because we're going to create a 5/8 inch dado, I'm going to lay in a line at 5/8 of an inch. Now you say, why do I need to do that if I've already got a line? Well, the reason is, as you use a router, what you want to do is always set your fence to the left-hand side of the cut. So in doing so, you want to have to this way on the left-hand side, and when I spin the board around, I'm going to have to lay it out on the other side. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and lay in both pieces so I don't have to worry about it. And at this point, I'm going to take a square and just make a couple lines right on my 2 layout lines. No need to go all the way across. It's not important because we're just going to use these lines as a guide for our straight fence. So we really only need an indication of where they are so we can set things up. All right, so that's all we need for layout. Let me now explain the router setup that we have. So here's the router. I'm going to use it as a trim router. I've gotten to the point where I really enjoy these routers. The problem is that they only take 1/4 inch shanks. If you work in 1/2 inch shank or do have a lot of 1/2 inch shank router bits, it's not optimal for you to take one of these. But if you're looking for a starter piece, I really enjoy this. This is a pattern bit. It's a top mount bearing. So what happens then, as this bearing runs against the fence, the router bit cuts the exact same size. So they have them in different sizes. You can buy 1/2 inch, 5/8, 3/4, and bigger. So check the ones you want. I leave a 3/4 inch pattern bit set up in my router almost all the time because I use it that much. But in this case, we're going to use a 5/8. So we need a straight fence now. And this is the straight fence that I'm going to use. It's a piece of plywood with another piece just nailed and glued to it. And I've run this across the joiner a few times to make sure that I get it exactly straight. And that's all there is to it. So what we'll do is I'm going to go ahead and bring this in, set it right at the lines, and clamp it in place. And then we'll make the cut, turn it around, and make the second cut. Now I've got everything clamped up and ready to go, but before we do anything, I want you to understand what this is and how this is all set up. I've got my straight fence laid down on my line to the left-hand side, like we talked about. I've got a Veritas bench clamp here that fits in my dog hole and just holds down the back side. I got an F-style clamp on the front. The kicker on this is, as this router bit follows the fence, if the fence moves, then our cut's off. So we have to make sure that everything stays in line. So with everything set, I'm ready to go ahead and make the first cut. Now that's essentially all it is. It's just an 1/8 of an inch deep cut, and it's not really for strength. What it is for registration purposes, so we can get the sides right where we need. I'll unclamp this, turn it around, and make the second cut, and we'll go on from there. All right. So here's where the information starts to come out. You remember when we milled the top, we left it over wide. And the reason you leave it over wide is because as you're doing this operation, depending on the wood, depending on a lot of the different things that are happening, you could get some blowout on this outside edge as you exit the cut. So we got just a little bit here. But what we're seeing is, at this point, I can take this now with the extra 1/4 inch or so that I have on there, strip it, run more time over the joiner if I want, or just double cut it at the table saw and I can cut out any of that bad, and it brings us down to our final width. So that's the reason we're slightly over on what we're doing. The other thing is that we left the ends a little bit over thick, and the reason is we want this to be a snug fit and we don't want it to be sloppy in there. So as we set it up, you can see that this is not going to go down inside there. So I'm going to have to do a little work on this, which is exactly what I plan to do to make sure I have a nice snug fit. So I'm going to go at it with scrapers or with my sander if I want. Now the thing I would suggest is don't go, if you're into using power tools, don't go back over to your planer and try to sneak this through, just because one of the things that you'll find with the planer is as you take a deeper cut, you actually get a cleaner cut. As you try to just scrape the top, and this is contrary to what almost every woodworker thinks, when you just try to scrape it, you're scraping the cut as opposed to actually cutting. And what happens is you're more apt to tear out the grain. So from this point, I'm going to work with a scraper. Probably I'll grab my sander and clean it up that way as well. But we'll work both sides until we can get it to sit down in there nice and snug.